It is now my unbelievably great pleasure to introduce our guest today. Once again, friend of the pod, the congressman from Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, fresh from a red-eye back from Washington, D.C. after deposing the nation's Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Joe Neguse. Welcome back to the Get More Smarter podcast.
Good to be back. Ready to get smarter. Thank you all for having me on.
Well, there's a lot of reporting that your questioning in the House Judiciary Committee hearing, we'll play a clip of that in a second, might have been the final straw for President Trump to oust Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Let's play one of those key clips here, and then I want to ask you something about it.
Of the hundreds of thousands of companies in the United States, you identified 4. One of those is this Safe America Media company. Where is Safe America Media headquartered?
I don't know.
I don't know either, Madam Secretary. We can't find it. We can't find a website. We did find an address that's registered for this company. Do you know where that address is?
Is there a problem with this contract?
I'll tell you about it. Madam Secretary, the address is registered to a political operative. Madam Secretary, the company, and then I'll give you an opportunity to respond. The company is registered to a political operative in Virginia. Do you know, just by way of example, whether this company that received $143 million in taxpayer dollars, has it ever done work for the government before?
I don't know. I can't.
The answer is it has not. And do you know why we know that? Because it was incorporated 8 days before this contract went out. You want the American people to believe that this is all above board?
Yes,
that $143 million of taxpayer money just happened to go to this one company that doesn't have a headquarters, doesn't have a website, has never done work for the federal government before, and is registered apparently or attached to a residence from a political operative. And of course, one of the subcontractors of that contract, as you know, is a political firm that's tied to you back when you were governor of South Dakota. The reason why I ask these questions is that this is taxpayer money. And I presume, I don't know this for a fact, but Senator Tillis noted yesterday the way in which your agency is blocking the Inspector General from 11 different investigations that it is trying to conduct. I don't know if this happens to be one of them. I certainly hope it is, because eventually the facts will become public in this regard. And there are serious laws implicated, conflict of interest laws, federal procurement laws, that I believe
followed. All done correctly. All
done correctly.
14 billion impressions from the marketing campaign.
Sure.
It was money spent in this country and in 8 different countries that illegal migration was coming from.
Madam Secretary,
overwhelmingly effective.
We all understand the argument that you've made. That somehow this ad campaign on Fox News of you at Mount Rushmore has led to millions of people self-deporting. You're using millions of dollars of taxpayer money in this way. It is fraud. And ultimately, I think there's going to be accountability.
Secretary Noem claimed or said in that hearing that President Trump knew about this ad campaign. She seemed kind of confused about how to respond to you. Do you think she was unprepared or just doesn't have an answer?
Well, look, there's a lot to unpack from her testimony before the Senate and before the House Judiciary Committees. My view is that she clearly lied, and there were a number of mistruths that she gave both in front of the Senate and with respect to her testimony in front of the House Judiciary Committee, including, in my view, I think we will find eventually during the exchange that you just identified, right? I mean, and of course that included what you just referenced, that when she testified in front of the Senate, she apparently, told Senator Kennedy that the president was involved in approving that particular contract. Now the president has denied that that's the case. Of course, we don't really know. I mean, at the end of the day,
right.
part of the mystery here is the Trump administration is deeply corrupt. President Trump, his family, they're making billions of dollars, money hand over fist. And so was he angry at this particular instance because he was not directly involved in this grift, and he's angry that other people are sort of making, or was it, just simply a function that this was just embarrassing to the administration? But regardless, it's very clear to me that there were laws that were violated. And it can get a bit dense. I mean, even that exchange, it's kind of complex with respect to federal procurement laws and, competitive bids and all the like. At the end of the day, really, this is what it's about, is that she was steering, in my view, the department was steering, hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money to political allies, right? I mean, that's it. It's not that much, it's not more complicated than that. And so fraud, corruption, conflict of interest laws, there are a variety, panoply of federal laws that apply to these kinds of activities. And, I think eventually the facts are going to come out. We're already learning more in the last 24 hours than we knew when she was testifying in front of the committee, just based off of what my staff and I had sort of,
Wow.
had compiled from ProPublica and other sources.
Do you think that Trump had already decided to fire her before she took the stand in your committee and in the Senate, or did she literally talk herself out of a job this week?
I mean, look, I don't think there's any question that she was on thin ice going into this week by virtue of the lawless way in which she had presided over this agency for the last 14 months and the sustained criticism that she had received, very visceral opposition from the American public because of her actions. Well, in Minneapolis, of course, the tragic deaths of Renee Good and Alex Priddy, just the violations of constitutional rights of citizens, the incompetence. She basically single-handedly destroyed FEMA. I mean, FEMA right now is not functioning
Yeah.
anymore, right? And for a variety of different reasons. And so all of that clearly built to a crescendo. But I do believe, and I'm not one to, presume that I would know what animates President Trump's decision making, right? Which is nonsensical. But it's pretty clear from public sources that the straw that broke the camel's back, ultimately the straws, were her testimony in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and then her testimony in front of the House Judiciary Committee the next day. And I do think this contract, this $220 million, and just the utter fraudulent nature of it all, ultimately, had an impact in terms of convincing the administration that this was just too embarrassing for them. And when you have convinced an administration like the Trump administration that's so deeply corrupt that you are too corrupt, you then understand that you've kind of gone beyond the pale. I don't really know how to describe that, right?
It's almost impressive.
Well,
It's just,
you were on CNN this week, and you were talking to Jake Tapper, and you said something rather interesting. So we want to play another clip and then have you react to it.
You called this fraud. Do you think her firing and being given another job in the administration is appropriate?
Well, I certainly think her being terminated is appropriate, and it's an important step in our fight for accountability, but it is a first step. Accountability ultimately means that if there were any laws violated, procurement laws, conflict of interest laws, that those ultimately, that evidence is uncovered and that, prosecutions commence if appropriate. And so I don't think that this is the beginning, not the end, with respect to accountability. With respect to the new position that the president apparently conjured up, it sounds like something he saw in a movie. But anyway, we're not quite sure what this new position is.
We're running.
So let's talk about the shield of America or whatever in a second here. But what do you think comes next?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of different things I would say. So one, Senator Tillis noted during the testimony of Secretary Noem in front of the Senate that the Inspector General is being blocked at the Department of Homeland Security from conducting somewhere between 10 to 11 different investigations. We don't know whether this particular matter is one of those. I certainly hope that that's the case. But in any event, Secretary Noem was blocking those investigations every step of the way. I think we're going to need to put some pressure now on the agency in the wake of Secretary Noem's departure to ensure that they are no longer blocking the investigations that ought to be conducted by the Inspector General. And I think you're going to see a bipartisan push for that, both within the House as well as the Senate. And you're already starting to see some signals today that members, I think in particular now that Secretary Noem has been terminated, there's some Republicans who are a bit more willing to perhaps be more public in their criticism. So Inspector General has got to get to the bottom of it. And then, presumably based off what the Inspector General finds, it may very well be that there are civil penalties. As I mentioned, there could be litigation from other firms, for example, that were blocked out of the competitive bidding process because Secretary Noem decided that this was going to be apportioned to her allies, and there could be criminal penalties. I mean, again, we have very strict federal conflict of interest laws for a reason, and I imagine that eventually, as I said, once the evidence comes to light, that prosecutors will be able to get to the bottom of it. So.
You mentioned in that clip briefly her new title, which is I had to write it down: Special Envoy for the Shield of the Americas. What does that mean? You have any idea?
I don't know. I mean, you tell me. I have no idea. Like I said, it sounds like it's from Game of Thrones or something, like the protector of the second realm. Or a friend of mine, Representative Moskowitz out of Florida, said that it sounded like something that he may have heard in the Avengers movie. I mean, clearly what this was is an attempt by the president to keep the secretary close, because I presume that notwithstanding what we've just learned in the last 72 hours regarding this particular contract, the secretary is privy to all kinds of information, as is Mr. Lewandowski, about the president and corruption across the board. So I think rather than terminating her completely, they clearly decided that they would terminate her from Homeland Security and then put her in this made-up job elsewhere so that the affiliation with the administration continues. So.
President Trump announced that Oklahoma Senator Mark Wayne Mullen is his choice to succeed Kristi Noem. What's your take on that? Why him?
Yeah, I think from what I understand, based off the public reporting, it strikes me. I mean, this is an individual who has no experience in the sense of traditional experience in the Homeland Security. You sort of think about Homeland Security secretaries in the past under Republican and Democratic administrations: Michael Chertoff, Janet Napolitano, Secretary Jay during Obama's administration, the second term. These are very accomplished lawyers, litigators. They've worked in the national security space, right? They know what they're doing with respect to, ensuring that adherence to the Constitution is their North Star. And in this case, you just have this kind of random, obscure senator whom, by all accounts, based on public reporting, is a sycophant to President Trump. He's voted, every step of the way, capitulated to President Trump's whims. And apparently there was some news article that said that essentially the president liked seeing him on TV. He's one of the President Trump's most ardent defenders, right? He'll go on television and defend anything the president does, irrespective of the underlying merits. There's a really kind of absurd clip a few days ago where he's defending some president's actions in
The
Iran.
smell of war, is that the one?
Yeah, I'm sure you saw exactly precisely the wordplay around war. So yeah, I mean that's what President Trump looks for, right? Is someone whom is pliant and malleable and will just sort of do his bidding. Of course, this guy does not have the temperament to be Homeland Secretary, Secretary of Homeland Security, a guy that almost came to blows in a Senate hearing 2 years ago with the former, I think the current president of the Teamsters. Just last week, he called Rand Paul a snake. Rand Paul, of course, as you all know, is not just Kentucky's senator, one of the Kentucky senators. He's the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, the Oversight Committee, the committee that has jurisdiction over this nomination. So, we'll see where this goes, but obviously he's not qualified to lead the agency, and we'll see what happens in the Senate.
We want to touch on a few more issues while we have you. Speaking of
Sure.
people that Donald Trump apparently likes to see on TV, Attorney General Pam Bondi was subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee to testify more about the Epstein files, which is interesting because that was a bipartisan subpoena. We're starting to see Republicans stand up a little tiny bit here and there to the administration. What do you make of Republicans turning on Bondi and Trump in this instance?
In part, it is emblematic of a larger trend that you kind of noted, Ian, which you saw. It was just evident with respect to what happened regarding Secretary Noem as well. These cabinet officials aren't just sycophantic supporters of the president. They are deeply incompetent, and they are ultimately dismantling core parts of the government. And in the case of the Department of Homeland Security, you saw that with respect to FEMA, as I mentioned, where Senator Tom Tillis, very conservative Republican, decides that this is just too much, that he's not going to tolerate it any further, given the way in which his state is being impacted, right? I think one could make, there's a through line, a connective tissue to some of what's happening in the Department of Justice. Obviously, you have an attorney general who is, again, sycophantic supporter of the president, deeply corrupt, and also just incompetent, and has very clearly withheld files with respect to the Epstein matter and violated the federal law that we passed on a bipartisan basis. And I think for some of these Republican members, ultimately, they've just they come to the conclusion that enough's enough. I actually think that you're going to see even more of this metastasize later this year, once we get past primary season, right? When when the primaries are firmly in our rear view, you're going to have a lot of Republican members who begin to see a political system that down the line no longer has Donald Trump at its center, right? As he exits the stage and ends his presidency in 2.5 years. And so I think you're going to see more people being willing to perhaps kind of actually step up for their constituents and finally begin to function like relatively not normal, but at least some semblance of what the Congress used to be.
What a novel idea.
Bondi's very combative hearing on the Hill last week, or 2 weeks ago. It's all a freaking blur, man. I mean, it's obvious that a lot of these cabinet members, when they come in front of committees, are performing for an audience of one, right? They're doing it so Trump sees them on TV and knows they're on side. But do you think that Bondi's really pugilistic appearance, to be very generous to her, hurt her case as well and led to this subpoena?
Yes. I think that's true, and that's a very astute observation. I think that it may very well have impressed her, the president of the United States, who, as you said, wants to see this pugilistic kind of vitriolic response that emulates how he approaches all of the people he deems political enemies. But it will also there are collateral consequences to that. It will cost you, and in this case, you're right. I mean, there are 5 House Republicans who decided on the House Oversight Committee to cross party lines and vote in favor of that subpoena. But I also will say part of it is this administration. It's kind of burned to the ground approach to politics, not just with respect to Democrats, but with Republican members, where if you have the audacity to, in any way contravene one of the president's priorities or just disagree with him, they will declare, nuclear war against you and will essentially try to destroy your career. Clearly, that is disincentivizing some Republicans from, towing the party line.
Well, Congressman Joe Neguse, slayer of cabinet members, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and visit with us on the Get More Smarter podcast. I know it's been a long week. Get some rest, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks for keeping everybody informed and keep the faith.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We appreciate your time, sir.